Foreign Minister Jaishankar, thank you for speaking to India today.
Pleasure.
You have just had a hectic visit from President Donald Trump, his first state visit that was there, and he seemed very happy with the visit. What is the big takeaways that India gets from this visit?
Well, this is the 7th visit by an American president. It's the first time that you've had a visit only to India, which I think says something. It comes in his first term. The fact that he's taken time off as the political calendar unfolds shows you that importance which we both give to the relationship. Right. So I think the right way to see this visit is that you are actually seeing the India-America relationship kind of develop, mature. In many ways, there are new areas of cooperation. It's getting deeper. The numbers are getting larger. So it's really, in a sense, it's organically, smoothly moving forward. But there are many more dimensions, much closer cooperation. And you can see that today. You can see that in the politics of the relationship, in the strategic convergence, in the quality of the defense relationship. There were some agreements which preceded the visit. You can see that in areas like counterterrorism, homeland security, in the entire economic family of issues, trade, technology transfers. You can see that in an energy relationship which was not there. For many years nuclear was the focus with the US, but today we are importing substantial amounts of oil and gas from the United States. We could be importing even coal at some foreseeable future. And you can see that in the people to people. One of the unique characteristics of this relationship today is what a strong P2P component it has. And again, that is on the Indian side, people have had concerns about visas and
right. Was that question addressed the H-1B visa?
No, but hold on. Let me finish there. So right. I think it was, to my mind, appropriate that this visit began with a P2P. And it began with the most impressive P2P in the Motera Stadium in Ahmedabad. Okay. Because that really demonstrated today the fact that there is so much goodwill and support, popular support for this relationship. Of course, a lot of the other issues that are on your mind are there. I see that.
Well, let's start with those issues, particularly on the trade, given that President Trump has paid great emphasis yes. On trade itself and has had concerns with India's balance of trade, saying that we have high tariffs. We were supposed to at least get a mini deal on this trip as part of the entire, maybe the centerpiece of it. Why didn't that mini deal work out? And what is this big deal that is being talked about?
Well, I think we had negotiations between our trade ministers. Most of those related to market access issues, some to tariff issues, and what they were trying to do was to put together a fair package. Now, in between, there was some I would say, people were of double mind. Do we do a mini deal or do we do a bigger deal? Do we do both? Do we only do one? I think these were issues. So finally, where it got settled yesterday evening was that we would do a deal. In fact, I'll read out to you the particular formulation, which is that they agreed to promptly conclude the ongoing negotiations, which they hope that can become the phase 1 of a comprehensive bilateral trade agreement. So I think the idea is, look, you take the immediate issues. If you can resolve that kind of gives you it sort of clears up some of the pending issues, gives you the foundation really to go ahead.
So what you're saying, Foreign Minister, is that we are going to get a phase 1 deal pretty quickly. Could be weeks.
Yes. Yes.
And that would cover all the contentious issues that were there. We wanted a restoration of GSP, the generalized system of preferences that gave 3,000 goods duty free.
You know by now a deal's a deal only when there's a deal, and forecasting a deal is never a good idea. But what I can say is that I know people have worked very hard in trying to put a package together, which is a fair package, which would then allow a lot of issues which have till now largely dominated the debate, to settle those, so that we can actually now look at the bigger issues.
And when we look at the bigger issues that we have, there is talk of a free trade agreement with the US. I mean, this has been there for a while. When we say big deal, does that mean it, or is that some other kind of preferential arrangement that is being worked out when you say a big deal?
Look, you heard President Trump say that at Ahmedabad. Right. I think he said that at the press conference as well. You heard our Prime Minister also speak about a larger agreement. You'll have to be a little patient because I think people have to discuss whatever the contours of that are. But the key issue is really that, I'm now giving you an Indian perspective. Look, we have 5 major trade partners, big ones. Big ones means trade partners who are more than $100 billion in trade, which are the US, China, ASEAN, EU, and the Gulf, not necessarily in that order. Japan is substantial, but it's not of that size. Now, we have to see if we have to grow our economic engagements, increase our exports, which of these are the most complementary? Where is there room for growth in our export basket? Where is it that there is less clash of interests, if you would? And clearly the US is a developed economy. It's been doing very well. The demands in US are growing. So it's very natural today that we would look at the US, but we'll also be possibly looking at some other possibilities.
Now, part of this, in the joint statement that was read out yesterday, there was a particular phrase that was used, which was comprehensive global strategic partnership. Is this an upgrade? Can you give us the crux of what this means, as different from what was there before?
Well, it is an upgrade because, what people do in diplomacy is they use words to kind of characterize a relationship, and at least people in the same business kind of pick up the signals. I mean, it's a kind of a ratings process, if you would. So the more, depending on the adjectives you add and what those objectives are. But if you come down to it, I think today what began really as a much narrower relationship, in the scope of cooperation, the areas of cooperation, the significance of what we were trying to do. I think this relationship has really broadened today. It has global impact. And the rest of the world today follows this relationship precisely for that reason. And it is truly comprehensive. You look, the United States, this is one relationship where I can say there isn't an aspect of human activity which is not in some way touched upon by this relationship.
Now, I was reading part of that dealt with defense and co-production. Our relations with the US in terms of defense purchases particularly has grown significantly. It's now probably totaling, with this current purchase of helicopters, $20 billion or so. We have had also exercises with the US armed forces. What does this signify in terms of it? And President Trump also talked of selling us really, really high-tech equipment. What is the, are we now moving towards purchasing from the Americans completely? There is an issue with the Russians as well, if we are...
No, look, I think broadly what we are doing in defense mirrors what we are doing in overall strategy. In overall strategy, we are looking today at a multipolar world. There are different powers who have their own relationships. Our objective is to have as many positive relationships and leverage those relationships effectively as possible for our benefit. So, when you say, have we bought more from the United States? Yes, because for 40 odd years after the 1965 war with Pakistan, we didn't buy anything from the United States. By the way, mainly because the United States won't sell it to us. Now, since then, for more than a decade now, the equipment supplies relationship from the United States is an option. So, typically in many areas, our military sort of looks at multiple sourcing. Sometimes they tender it out, sometimes one particular sort of option is obviously more, fits the bill very neatly. It depends, on the situation. There are different sort of models here. But the fact that we have bought some particular platforms from the US obviously has gone down well here. But it's also a fact that we've been buying things from other suppliers as well, and to my mind that is the way it should be, because it is in India's interest to have those multiple relationships, and certainly with the close partners that would be in defense as well.
And the Americans had an objection to us purchasing particularly the S-400 air defense from Russia. Now, has that issue been sorted out? Because they said, look, interoperability and other issues would come up, and they actually wanted to impose what they call the CATSA sanctions on us.
Look,
has that been sorted out?
I know that there is a press narrative here. What I can tell you is we will do what is in our national interest. We have said that to the Americans very clearly. I have said that publicly. And I think my hope and expectation is that people will understand that. I mean, that has been our that is the Indian persona. I mean, we are an independent minded country. We will make the best choice which is best from the point of view of our national interest.
And did it come up in the talks this time? Did the Americans bring it up?
Not this time.
Okay. And we were supposed to also sign the final foundational agreement, as it's called, on the, I think it was on maps and cartography, BECA as the terminology is used. Is that, when you did the 2+2, is that on the anvil as quickly as?
I think there are discussions on that.
Right.
I don't think it is not my impression that this is close to conclusion. There's a reference in the joint statement to that.
Okay. And then the other part of the joint statement was a reiteration of the Indo-Pacific engagement that we have with the US. How significant is that? Is it still, again, terminology? Is this Indo-Pacific arrangement in some senses seen as a counterbalancing to China? Where does this stand?
No, look, Indo-Pacific is a reality. Indo-Pacific is a naval reality, Indo-Pacific is a political reality, Indo-Pacific is a trade reality, it's an economic reality. Why is it a reality? It is a reality today. What does Indo-Pacific mean? It means that you cannot deal with Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean as two separate arenas and silo them. The whole idea of Indo-Pacific is to get people to recognize and plan and act on the basis that it is today much more seamless. And now again, I am giving you the Indian perspective on it. Look, we started look east, then we added connectivity and security and a stronger sense of purpose, and it became act east. But the fact is today our interests, our key trading partners include China, Japan, Korea, Australia, all of whom are in a sense, well, not Australia, but the rest are beyond the Indian Ocean. So, it is not that India's interests, either economic interests or strategic interests, is limited to the Indian Ocean. It is not that Indian footprint is limited to that. I mean, we operate beyond. We operate politically, we operate, as I said, economically, and we operate strategically. So, it's not that we have invented Indo-Pacific as some kind of, as I said, some kind of prediction or some kind of future prospect. It exists. Indo-Pacific is the way we all operate. I think, and I would not, we don't think it's a prerogative of one country. I mean, what we are saying is, look, it's there. We have our approach. You're welcome to have yours. The ASEAN has its. The Americans have theirs. The Japanese have theirs. We would, we want really open debate and open approach to it.
Now, recently we've upgraded what we call the Quad initiative that's there, which is Australia, USA and Japan along with India. Isn't that some sort of a signal again that this grouping is coming together? Because at one time we believed it only should be at a much lower level, but now it's come up to your level. What's the sense of bringing that around into it?
It's first of all, it's a diplomatic mechanism. Okay.
This is not to again contain or act as a countervailing force to China.
If you and I meet, I mean, why should some third party wonder why you and I are meeting? I mean, I might actually like you. I might have a common purpose with you. So, I certainly think that all of us in this world should be secure enough and confident enough not to feel that, because somebody else is meeting, you have a problem. I don't feel it when other people meet.
So what's
after all, many of my neighbors meet. So should I say every time my neighbors meet that I have a problem with your meeting because you might be targeting me? I don't think so. I think it's our prerogative to meet anybody we like. I think how international relations function today is by working on our convergences. We do have convergences with these countries, which is why we meet. And by the way, do understand, we also meet as RIC, and it's a much older meeting.
That is Russia, India and China.
Russia, India, China. We meet as BRICS.
Right.
So, if we can meet
meet as SEO as well, I would gather.
Absolutely. So, I think, the people need to be objective about this.
Okay. One of the things that President Obama said when he came to India, when he visited India, was an assurance that America would work towards making India a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Where has that, President Trump also mentioned it in his statement, but is this still just mouthing words that really have no meaning, because we've now it's almost 10 years since we've been saying this. Is there any progress? Do you see any change in attitude?
Well, look, the United States, the support of the United States for our becoming permanent member of the Security Council is welcome. It is not just welcome, it is important, it is valuable. But the reform of the United Nations concerns many other countries. So, this is not a problem for the lack of an outcome, is not an Indo-US issue. It is an issue of the United Nations. And our sense is today that an overwhelming number of countries support the idea of a reformed United Nations. I think the fact that today we are still looking at a kind of a 1945 design of a particular organization. I mean, 1945 was 75 years ago. Okay. So, I think it would be fair to call it anachronistic. So much has changed in the world in the last 75 years. I mean, you had even G7 today in a sense replaced by G20, which shows that the world has changed. So, if everywhere else the world has changed and people support it, why should you hold back in one particular arena unless somebody has a vested interest in doing so? We think today that the world is ready for a reformed UN. We believe the vast number of countries support it. We would like to see text-based negotiations on this, and we would urge all the other countries, especially those who have a prominent role in the UN, to support that.
Now, coming to what we had earlier just referred to was the concern in the US in terms of its migration policy, and particularly impacting our H-1B visas and our H-4 visas. Was that something that we got a reassurance from President Trump that in terms of looking at Indians, we would not be impacted by whatever policy he has?
No, look, I don't think it works quite the way you put it. I would put it this way, and that's how it happened. Look, India is today itself a source of innovation and a very important source of talent. Okay. There is a high degree of trust between India and United States because we are democratic societies. So, we are democratic societies, we understand and respect market rules, market economic rules. So, there is a direct connect between talent and innovation. the flow of talent is not just an Indian preference. We believe it is an American interest, and I think most Americans recognize that. So, the issue today is that how do you, if the United States wants to remain as the leader of innovation and technology in the world, then it makes sense for the United States to remain open to the flow of talent. And India, of course, as I said, has an interest both in the talent and in the innovation. And talent in this particular case, though it is not the only case, the talent is significantly H-1B category of visas. So, do we support and make a case for H-1B visas and smoother, more liberal H-1B visas? Of course we do, and we did on this occasion. Are we attempting to, would we like to convince others that, look, that is critical to your remaining a technology leader? Of course, that is our endeavor. That is our natural endeavor.
Okay. Coming to energy, which you mentioned earlier, the US imposed sanctions on Iran and then told us to taper off our purchases from there. Venezuela was the other place that they said that. We are now importing oil from the US, and apart from that, various other energy deals. What is
from Russia as well?
Of course, yes. Is this, given the distance and everything else, is this price compatible? You had talked of stability. You had wanted, once the Iran sanctions came in, to also ensure that price is reasonable. Has that been? Has that happened?
Well, I am not. I mean, to be very honest, I don't know the details of our energy trade. That is something which people more directly dealing with it would know. But my understanding is that today the sourcing from the United States or Russia is competitive. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sourcing it.
And you see it as also a growing sort of partnership with the US on this? Is it some sense of de-risking our supplies, say, from the Gulf and other countries, and that's why we are?
Well, look, as a common sense proposition, no country on any matter would like to be excessively dependent on one source or one geography, or in that sense, the more you have, the more you hedge, the safer off you are. And contracts with suppliers like the US and Russia, I think give you many more options.
Well, coming to a more general foreign policy question, we have seen the world order give way to what one would describe as a new global disorder, if that's the way you'd like to put it. There's a receding globalism, a new nationalism and insularism, and the weakening of international institutions. How do you pursue India's interest in this era of tectonic shifts?
I think by being confident, by not being risk averse, by being nimble. So when you see changes, it's a bit like playing a game. I mean, if I see you coming at me and I can't read you properly, right, I have to sort of get into that mindset of adjusting to those changes. So what we have tried to do is really follow global politics and these global relationships very carefully, understand them well, then try to see how they sort of work for us. And I would say, I mean, without being unduly sort of, I'm really being objective here. I think we've done it reasonably successfully here. That if you look today at the state of our relations, we've kind of ramped up our ties with the US, but at the same time, our ties with Russia today are visibly better than they were some years ago. We have, I mean, what is a very complex relationship with China has been, I think, managed reasonably well. We are today working with Europe with an intensity we have not shown for many years. I think the Japan relationship is great. With ASEAN, it's been again very good. And it's not, I mean, part of it is you have to sort of work the big league well, but also in this what you call disorder, a lot of middle powers become more important. So you have, Australia, Indonesia, Brazil, Saudi Arabia. I think our relations with all of them. I mean, if you look actually at the G20 countries, you will actually see in the last few years particularly, there's been a very concentrated bilateral focus on those G19 relationships. So it's not only the top 4 or 5. And we have at the same time expanded our footprint. If you see Africa, for example, you have 18 new embassies there. We've had more of our leaders go to Africa in the last 5 years than probably in the entire time before that. We have, if you look at our development assistance programs, they range from CARICOM to Pacific Islands to Mongolia. The footprint is bigger, the levels of energy are more, the commitment is more, the engagements are more substantive. But at the end of it all, it is that ability to read the global tea leaves and build those relationships and manage them in a way in which you can actually do all of them together.
And when you talk of the global tea leaves, and if you've read them, what are the big challenges of 2020 and beyond, if you had to look at it, that India faces?
Well, I think India faces the same challenges as the rest of the world, mostly. We have some unique ones. But one big challenge, of course, is the sharpening contradiction between US and China. Another one are the arguments within the Western world. Then there is shall I say, a repositioning of America, because America has had a footprint throughout the world, in places like Afghanistan or the Middle East, or maybe even East Asia, it means something. So I would say these would be among the important challenges, but they're not the only challenges. I think the rise of China will continue to play out and it will have its ripple impact. I would say the West Asia, what's the Middle East for the Westerners, is more turbulent, it's not less. And I think there are some big challenges out there in Africa. So it's not an easy world.
What is the difference Prime Minister Modi has brought to foreign policy? What are the shifts that he has brought in? Is there a Modi doctrine, if we can call it that way?
Well, look, there's a very discernible shift. Everybody knows it. You may like it, you may not like it, but it cannot be anybody's case that he's not made an enormous difference in our profile. Okay, I think he's brought sort of a more modernistic thinking into foreign policy, much greater willingness really to engage multiple players, a very strong commitment to advance our national interests, but at the same time a very genuine sort of feeling for the world. So when people often speak about nationalism, India is not, in many countries, a nationalist leader is one who wants to do less with the world, not more with the world. You look at our sort of last few years, the track record. The record has been, in fact, a much greater willingness. We are today first responders in humanitarian and disaster response situations. We have led important initiatives like the International Solar Alliance, or now the Disaster Resilient Coalition. We have also in our development assistance programs have gone up very much. You see, whether it's the Africa Summit or the Pacific Island, these have become much more serious exercises, much more diligent follow-up. There's a sort of a rigor with which they are pursued. So I think people recognize that, and on top of that, there's also a much stronger projection of the persona of India on the international stage. Today when people think of India, there is some, it could be the International Day of Yoga, or it could be
Brand India, as you would call it.
Yeah, I think Brand India is much bigger, much stronger. than it was before.
If you come, you talked of the dogmas of Delhi. Have you been able to break through? And you said that was, in some senses, a prison in terms of our thinking. Have you been, let's put it this way, come out of jail of that?
No, I'm not the guy who's in jail. I was talking to people who I think are sometimes in that jail. But look, I think it's work in progress. If you've had many years of, a certain belief or a certain approach, it doesn't change that rapidly. But a lot of it, you see, again, it depends partly on the demographics, partly on where you are talking. I've found, for example, audiences in Mumbai would be very different from Delhi.
But when you said dogmas, what did you mean? There was a stuck thinking?
No, yes, I think a lot of it was, don't do that. A lot of it was we haven't done it. Why are we doing this? This is different. See, it was almost like if it's different, don't do it. So don't take this risk. Don't divert from that formulation. So it's a sort of
okay, let's deal with one of the dogmas, and that is with respect to our relations with Pakistan. What is the big difference, paradigm shift been there in the way we have dealt with Pakistan, this regime, the Modi regime?
Well, look, I think the agenda, there's been a difference in the agenda. There's been a difference in the approach, and there's been much greater clarity in that regard. At the end of the day, what does it come down to? It comes down to, look, a neighbor is a neighbor, we all know that, why it's important. These are the obvious things in the relationship. But finally, what it comes down to is the issue of terrorism, cross-border terrorism, and whether in some way our approach ends up normalizing it or contributes to normalizing it or prevents or doesn't sharpen global awareness about it. What we have to do is to make sure that the world must not accept the use of cross-border terrorism as a diplomatic tool under any circumstances, which means I must keep the spotlight on that. I must make it very clear, look, this is simply not on. And even the issue is not, do you talk to them, do you not talk to them? The issue is, what do you talk to them about, and what should be the behavioral pattern as you talk? So if you overlook, if we, the victims, go soft on somebody perpetrating terrorism against us, how do you expect the rest of the world to, will they stand up for you more than you are standing up for yourself? So it's not that complicated.
What did the strikes in Balakot and Uri change in some senses? What was the paradigm? Was there a paradigm shift in the way we dealt? What did it give us?
No, look, I think you know the answer. I think the answer is that people should realize that this is a government with a very strong determination to protect national interest, and that it would not be willing to be it will be tested at the cost of the people who will test it.
And the description of, people now call it cold peace with Pakistan. Is there any, what can we do to sort of, or they do to bring it back on the table in terms of a dialogue?
See, I don't think any sensible person would say we should not have a dialogue. Not India, Pakistan, any two neighbors should have dialogue. But I ask you the reverse question. Which other two neighbors practice, where does a neighbor practice cross-border terrorism against another neighbor? Because the moment you get away from that question and you pose all these other questions, you are now ducking that debate. So keep the focus on that.
Yesterday at the press conference, President Trump talked about the fact that if India wanted and Pakistan wanted, he was willing to mediate. Is there a role for the US in this?
I think we made our position very clear that this is a bilateral matter, and we are completely confident of dealing with it bilaterally.
Okay. You've also, the abrogation of Article 370. How has that played out internationally? How have you been dealing with this, with the various meetings that you've been holding in Europe? There's been concern in the US as well about it. What is the general sense you get about Article 370, the abrogation of it?
Look, I think if you explain to them what's happened in non-dogma terms, then they do understand that there were multiple issues out here, and there were issues of development, there were issues of socio-economic rights and laws, there were issues of separatism, there were issues of terrorism, and they all kind of interconnected in different ways. My sense is, if you explain to people a certain historical perspective, and then what is your thinking in reasonable terms, those who are open-minded are willing to listen and appreciate that point of view. I mean, obviously those who are not are not. So my own sense is that today we are now quite a few months since that has happened in August. There is a larger understanding, especially among governments, because look, governments are more serious about this exercise. I mean, I'm not disrespecting the media, but the governments are less polemical, they are less ideological, so they don't take angular views where facts are adjusted to support a particular sort of hypothesis. So I think most governments have today sort of acknowledged or at least sort of heard us out and sort of in a sense got a good grasp of what our thinking is. Now, we've also had a number of ambassadors go to Jammu and Kashmir. They've seen for themselves. I mean, they met people. My understanding is sometimes people who are critical of the government government of India, but they've come back, and I think they have overall a sense that the direction of developments in Jammu and Kashmir is positive. I mean, obviously there are still issues to be resolved. We don't hide that. So I think there is today a fair amount of international understanding there.
Now, you've had the US Congress, some sections of it wanting to pass a resolution. You went to Europe. There was also some members of the European Parliament wanting to pass a resolution against us. How have you dealt with this particular aspect? Is that over now, or they used to?
Well, look, some of it will be there, because remember, they are playing politics too. I mean, these are not necessarily objective sort of observers of what is happening in India. So they are playing their politics. So when you look at the ideological positions of many of these people, I think that is pretty self-evident. So, but overall, I would say that today, there is a reasonable understanding of what's happening there,
including the fact that detention of major leaders of the valley, as well as still internet communication not fully restored. Has that been brought up in any of your discussions, and how do we then?
No, look, I think people look at progressive, the direction of the movement. Okay, I mean, as I said, it was never our position that things will instantaneously get back to normal, and everything will be sort of sorted out. That was never a government position.
In terms of CEAA and NRC, has that come up in all your dealings internationally, and what have we explained in that?
Well, it has, sometimes it has come up. It came up, for example, when I was in Brussels. Mostly people wanting to know, I mean, the way it happens is, a foreign minister or somebody like that would come up to you and say, look, this is what I hear. Could you give me your perspective? So, and naturally we give them what is the accurate perspective on the matter. Now, we do explain to them that, since you asked about CAA, that look, if you look at the objectives of the changes in legislation. What does it do really? We already have a number of stateless people in this country. It reduces statelessness. Okay? It doesn't take away citizenship from anybody. It gives a number of people who don't have citizenship today, it gives them citizenship. So the result is the total statelessness in India has come down, and you are managing it in a way in which you don't want to create a greater pull factor in your neighborhood, okay? Because this country has its own challenges. I mean, it should not be burdened with the challenges of the larger region directly as well. Now, if you put it to them, you explain to them conceptually, somebody in Europe understands that, because after all, what is today Europe trying to do when it comes to migration? Europe is also trying to reduce statelessness. Europe also wants to do it without a pull factor. So, without a pull factor.
Right.
I mean, you don't want to,
right.
While you are sorting out the problem, you don't want to create more migrants to increase the problem. So, and when you ask them, saying, look, you explain to me, there must be a naturalization citizenship practice in your country. Does it have a context? Does it have a criteria? Are those criteria social criteria? Does it use ethnicity, religion, language? When they look at their own rules and regulations, mostly the answer would be a yes.
I want to move to another subject, but the unfortunate incidents that have happened in Delhi, did it in some senses mar the President Trump's visit, and what do you see behind the violence that is?
No, I would like to restrict my comments to foreign policy.
Okay. Coming to China, we've had the Chennai spirit that was there. We've had differences with China on the border issue. We have differences in terms of trade imbalances in their favor. And of course, there were their relations with Pakistan, particularly CPEC, their corridor that they built on POK, or the economic corridor that they're planning to build in POK. How much of that have we been able to address in terms of China, the concerns that were there, given the kind of closeness the two leaders exhibited at Chennai?
I would make two separate points, and it's important to understand both of them, because one, that we have an extraordinarily complex relationship with China, because if you look, as you yourself said, there's the boundary question, there are security issues, there's their relationship with Pakistan, there are trade concerns. Now, each one is a complex issue in itself, and put together, and it has taken multiple governments over many years to grapple with these issues, and as China has risen, these issues have not got smaller, because China's capability has grown, its ambitions has grown, its influence has grown. So, first of all, let's recognize that these are not issues which are going to be amenable to easy and ready solutions. If they were, previous governments and previous diplomats would have solved it. The second issue which you have to look at is, recognizing these are complex issues, do you then deal more with China or less with China? At a higher level with China or at a lower level with China? Deal more intensively and more open-mindedly with China or not? So, I would put it to you, precisely because the issues are so serious and so complex, it's important to have a very high level communication. And so, in 2017, this suggestion came from us, saying that, look, you are a rising power, we are a rising power, we will, our relationship with the rest of the world is going to be different, our relationship with each other will be different. So, if we don't sort of communicate in a very honest manner with each other, it's not good for either of us. And I think they recognize that point, and which is why you have these summit meetings. And to my mind, the summit meetings are quite helpful, because if leaders, quite apart from the content of the summit, the fact that the leaders talk with each other so with a degree of candor and directness, I think it sends a good message down the system.
Now, finally, on Think West, that is the thing that we've done, apart from acting East, now we're thinking West. How much of that has changed, given the fact that Saudi Arabia, UAE and others, what has been that arrangement that we've done that is now transforming, in some senses, relationships with them?
Well, when you asked what are the changes, what change has Prime Minister Modi brought to foreign policy, I think this is a very appropriate example, because here is a region very close to us. We do a lot of trade with this region, but till a few years ago we looked at it largely in terms of diaspora, and we looked at it largely in terms of oil.
Right.
Okay, and some trade. I mean, you had key countries here where there's been no strategic engagement for many, many years. Now, the paradox is these countries were actually following the changes in India, and they were very keen to engage, but they were not part of our strategic calculus in that clear sense. Today they are. So today you've had UAE as even the chief guest of the Republic Day. So I think today
that's a paradigm shift, you're saying.
UAE, Saudi Arabia, number of countries.
Coming to
even Israel.
Yeah. Coming to Afghanistan, we're likely to see a deal happen between the US and the Taliban for a new government. How much of this impacts us? What are our concerns of the kind of deal that could be arranged? And did we discuss this with President Trump in his New York?
Yes, there was a discussion on Afghanistan. There have been other discussions as well. I've had discussions with Secretary Pompeo, with Secretary Esper. I met Ambassador Khalilzad, briefed me when I was in Munich last week. So we do track what is in Afghanistan. Our NSAs also talk to each other. And we have legitimate interests in Afghanistan. We have a strong civilizational connect, people-to-people connect with Afghanistan. I mean, it's one of those societies you really feel proud going there as an Indian, because people acknowledge over many years that we've done an enormous amount of good in that country. And I think
we were sure that they would take some of our interests into account.
No, it's a look. Again, the way you approach it, it is as though others are working for you.
Right.
At the end of the day, if you have interest, you should move to secure them. I mean, right. Obviously, I will try and influence everybody to get outcomes. But finally, at the end of the day, it should be my endeavor in my foreign policy, using my instruments and my capability to secure my outcomes.
President Trump had hinted at us putting boots on the ground for security in Afghanistan. We are not considering any of those alternatives on that front. Okay, and finally on the economic front, has the slowdown that we faced in our economy in some senses impacted our diplomatic heft? Because, we were seen as one of the fastest growing economies, the size of our market was there. Does this in any way impact your ability to?
No, look, again, as in the other issues you raised, Kashmir, 370, Jammu and Kashmir, CAA. I think the overall message that we are conveying abroad is this is a government today which is deeply committed to deep reforms, deep social reforms, economic reforms, political reforms, security reforms. The mindset is not that we've come to power and we inherited problems and then let's kind of somehow get through it and leave this for people to carry on as a burden. I think there is a very active intention of sorting out problems, including legacy problems. And some of these issues which you mentioned, I mean, the citizenship issue or the or the CAA I'm talking about,
and GST
or GST, or even 370. These are not new issues. I mean, they've been going on for many, many years.
Well, this government didn't kick the can
So
down.
the whole idea is, I think serious people understand what that means. Okay. So why am I saying it? Because serious people also look at what's happening in the economy in a similar way. So my sense is, people do understand the challenges that we are addressing, including issues like NPS. They do understand that there is a big change, there's a systemic cleanup which is going on. They also appreciate that we have maintained a very good balance between the imperatives of increasing growth and the long-term requirements of maintaining the fiscal deficit levels. So I think they see that as a very sort of responsible, prudent management of finances. So so overall, I think there is an appreciation of the budget, the overall economic management. But the answer to your question would also be that wherever I go, I see an enormous interest in doing business with India. People are continuing to bet on us. I don't see any let up on that at all. So so the part of our problems, I mean, sometimes we have our own internal debate, which is okay, and a democratic society, that's natural. But I tell people that, look, sometimes we get too involved in our own conversation. We are talking to ourselves.
Right, not
sometimes also listen to another opinion. Look at what more objective people sometimes are saying. And I believe that today the world has a great sort of interest in India. I think people want to see us emerge as another driver of global economic growth. They think of us as a stabilizing power, as a responsible power. They see an India which is willing to make decisions, which will not duck the big debates. And I think a lot of the domestic, I mean, it's very fascinating. I spoke to you about going to Brussels, and you asked me, did the CAA come up? People were enormously fascinated by what's happening on the social side in India. How the gender gaps are closing, how girls' education is improving, how skills program is growing, what is happening on the digital side. These are of these are of great interest to the world.
One final question on trade, which you mentioned people are willing to do business with India. Why did we pull out of the RCEP? We were expected to sign it, but is that a closed chapter, and why did we?
Well, look, again, this is the trade minister's remit, but since I also happen to be there, I think the common sense answer was because the offers we got were not good enough. Why were they not good enough? Because I think they did not address a lot of the concerns we had. The possibility that if we had entered the arrangements as they were, it didn't protect us from what is already an enormous deficit vis-a-vis RCEP countries. And we are concerned about the deficit because we believe that those deficits have arisen not as an outcome of comparative advantage, but as a outcome of non-tariff barriers and lack of market access and regulatory and policy impediments in different RCEP countries. So we had key issues out there, and we finally at that time you have to take the call. Your concerns been addressed adequately or not?
But we're still open about.
And I think we took what I believe was a courageous but very necessary call.
And we're open to if.
Well, the ball is not in our court.
And how would you describe finally India? Is it a middling power? Is it a leading power? What would your description be of? You even talked about the Southwestern Power at one point.
No, look, I think it's contextual. Okay, it depends how you. It depends on the question you ask me. I mean, I would say as a country which would soon, one day, be the most populous country in the world, we should certainly have an aspiration to be a leading power. I don't feel the need to be apologetic or modest about it. I think it is only right that we should be. But you don't get there because you want to be or you aspire to be. You have to get there by hard work, by doing your diplomacy right, by strategizing, and that in a sense is what we are trying to do. Why I said at that time Southwestern was, people often say, because they equate Western and democracy, which by the way I think is a fundamentally flawed definition of democracy. I think today much of democracy exists outside the Western world. But I wanted to remind people that look, we are also a post-colonial society. We have struggled for our freedom with a lot of other countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America. There is a moral factor, I believe, strongly in international relations. And I think that's a constituency which has great respect, affection for us. For me, today I do more than, I do almost 500 and something, 530, 540 projects outside India. A large part of them in these countries. And the reason we do it is to send the message that look, we are, there is a fraternity of countries who have, not been, who have been in a sense victims of the age of imperialism. And today we are finding our rightful place, but it will take us some time.
And you, a personal question, what is the difference you feel of being foreign minister, you are foreign secretary, what's the big difference between the two?
Oh, that would take an interview all by itself.
But foreign secretary, foreign minister, thank you so much for this. Thank you.